get to serve many student populations on campus in approving their accommodations, evaluating their documentation, and trying to connect them to service providers that will provide them documentation for establishing accommodations. Yeah.
And at the end of our time today, and later today, I'm going to be emailing everyone these presentation slides we'll be covering. And I just started the recording of this workshop as well. So my plan is to send out not only the slides, but a recording of this workshop. And then I'll also have a brief little survey to send out for everyone who attended today. And we always appreciate your feedback. We also have a guest panelist today. We will be introducing them in the second half of this time together. They are from the Department of Rehabilitation, and we're really excited to have them join us and spend some time with them today. So our little quick agenda is just, as Eric mentioned, we're going to go be covering school place higher education accommodations at UCSB. We're going to be talking about accommodations in the workplace and requesting those. And then we'll have our friend Cynthia join us, and Eric and I will be facilitating a quick little panel Q&A with them, and then we'll open it up at the end of the presentations for anyone here live if there are any questions. Um, but before we begin, and I'll turn it over to Eric, I just want to say feel free to utilize the chat feature in this call or raise your hand. And we are always happy to take pause in our content and address anything that may come up. So again, we thank you all for being here, and I'll pass it over to Eric.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah, so specifically the legal part of the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990 covers higher education. The ADA is a law that prohibits state and local governments, such as school districts, colleges, public colleges, and universities and libraries, from discriminating against people with disabilities. Colleges and universities are required by Title II to provide students with disabilities with appropriate academic adjustments and auxiliary aids, as well as other services that are necessary to provide an individual with a disability an equal opportunity to participate in that school's program. Next slide. Yeah, so the process at DSP, at Disabled Students Program, uh, is just outlined is you apply and meet with a DSP specialist. Hopefully we identify in that meeting documentation that can form a nexus between your functional limitations, as we call them. It's kind of the how your disability impacts you in the classroom, and connect them to necessary appropriate accommodations that are reasonable. And then either we'll have in that meeting, we can have identify those accommodations and approve them, or you can make a request online of the types of accommodations you think would best. And then the disclosure and activation portion, which is informing instructors and activating your services, and then implementation and monitoring or checking in about how that's going. Next slide. Yeah, so breaking that down a little bit more, you would first create an online profile through the DSP portal, and that serves as a kind of receptacle or landing spot for a lot of your documentation and your uh, it's also you use the portal to request accommodations. And then we have a link here to scheduling an appointment with any of our specialists. So that's kind of something we've changed a bit. A student's assigned a specialist, but they're not required to meet with that particular specialist. They can meet with any of our specialists at any time that, kind of conforms with the student's schedule best. And we're trying to remove barriers all the time to make it more efficient and quicker for students to obtain their accommodation. So during the appointment that you list, we'll try to assist you in obtaining, identifying, and submitting documentation. And we'll do that documentation. I think I'll get to that a little bit in the next slide, but we welcome documentation sent by mail, fax. I wouldn't say not so much fax, but email or in person or uploaded directly to the portal. Um, Faxes tend to not be the most efficient way. And then the third step, will in our appointment, this could all happen in one appointment. We'll review your documentation, and it says it can take up to 3 business days. That is our kind of our targeted norm, but sometimes I can do all of this in one appointment with a student, including activation and approval and activation of your accommodations. And then if you're confirmed eligible, after if you want to do this, this is also can be done completely electronically over email or over the phone, or over Zoom. You can submit your interactive process form or meet with one of us. So you can request your accommodations if your documentation is sufficient. And then once we get that interactive process form or have that appointment, we'll activate your services, and we'll show you how to reach out to your instructors and uh, do that final step to activate your services. Next step, next slide. So the question is, what is the documentation that we like to have? So we have forms of different disability categories if you look at our website, under documentation guidelines, under the students section of our homepage. We look for written verification from a treating clinician, whether it be a medical doctor, psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist, licensed educational psychologist, social worker, etc. Um, so as I said, during that initial appointment, even we can identify who the provider might be. If you don't have a provider, we will attempt in that appointment to connect you to a provider on campus, whether it be a student health social worker or a therapist at CAPS or an outside of campus provider that accepts UC SHIP, like MindPath or LifeStance. Those are community providers that accept the university insurance. Yeah, and then so yeah, we'll connect you, identify that provider, and at least sometimes what I'll do is I'll make in that initial appointment, I'll facilitate with the student while they're with me and call student health or CAPS, and we'll set up an appointment. And if a student does not have a documentation based on that appointment being made, we can provide provisional services without documentation, assuming that that student will obtain that documentation. So that's another obstacle we've kind of removed, so a student isn't delayed. Next slide. Yeah, and so some of the common accommodations that are available are note-taking services, test-taking accommodations, sign language interpreters, and transcription services for deaf and hard of hearing students. And then course design accommodations such as attendance modification, participation modification, and assignment timeframe modification. We have also more recently, in the last few years since COVID, provided remote participation accommodations in some rare cases. Next slide. So once students have completed the form, met with a specialist, and reviewed their accommodations, they sign their service agreements, and we'll talk about an overview of how to navigate services and procedures or correspond through email or Zoom. And at that point, the student's ready to use the portal to disclose their approved services by sending instructor letters. So this is the way students inform their instructors of their approved DSP services, not their conditions or disabilities. That's confidential, but just the services that they're approved for. Yep. And then at that point, they activate their accommodations. Next slide. So yeah, after they activate their accommodations by signing their service agreements and informing their instructors, uh, and making a request through the portal, DSP acts as an advisory in an advisory capacity as a liaison to students, around getting their accommodations honored and providing faculty with information and guidance about reasonable accommodations. If for some reason the professor or faculty member believes accommodations constitute a fundamental alteration or undue burden of the learning objectives or essential nature of the course, specialists will use their expertise to committee and bring it to committee to analyze the situation if necessary, involve the chair, and if necessary, the campus ADA coordinator if the faculty have not demonstrated fundamental alteration and refuse to comply. So it doesn't usually get to that point, but just know that there is a chain of sort of, escalation, if you want to say, or just an up chain of a hierarchy to protect students with disabilities, and their accommodations. And I just wanted to make sure I'm allowing enough time for Jake. So next slide. I think that might have been the last slide, but yeah. So
Awesome.
I hope that wasn't too fast, but a lot of information. Take it over. Take it away, Jake.
Thanks, Eric. Um, well, now after Eric has explained requesting accommodations in the school place, I do want to talk a little bit about requesting accommodations in the workplace. And there's three main components when requesting accommodations as an employee to an organization. And those 3 points are disclosure, documentation, and implementation. So let's go and talk about each three of these. But before we get into disclosure, it is important to just reemphasize that the law Eric spoke about, ADA, also protects employees with disabilities in the workplace. It allows employees to request reasonable accommodations. A reasonable accommodation is any change to the application or hiring process, to the job, or to the way the job is done, or the work environment, which will allow a person with a disability who is qualified for the job to perform essential functions of that job and enjoy equal employment opportunities. So some factors for determining essential functions of a job can include whether the position exists specifically to perform these essential functions, the number of employees who are available to perform the same job duties, the expertise or skills required to perform the essential functions. So ADA protects employees to ask for these reasonable accommodations, and we also have in state and local laws protecting these this right as well. In California, specifically, there is the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, and this is the primary law in our state that provides employees with protection from discrimination, retaliation, and harassment in employment. And all employment provisions of this law this law's anti-discrimination provisions apply to all employers with 5 or more full-time or part-time employees. So it covers and uh, protects you in the workplace. All right, reasonable accommodations. So here I just wanted to provide some examples. When we think about reasonable accommodations, they can come in the form of maybe providing different alternative formats. For example, let's say I am in the workplace and I'd rather receive feedback from my supervisor in written form rather than verbal form. Maybe I process information better that way. That could be a reasonable accommodation to request. Um, and other types of reasonable accommodations can include accessible parking. An employer maybe can change their practice of only offering parking to certain staff management and to allow an employee who is unable to walk long distances access to a reserved parking lot spot closer to the building. There could be service animals as a reasonable accommodation. An employer reasonably changes their office no animals policy in order to welcome an employee's service animal. There could be equipment change. An employer purchases software that magnifies the computer screen to allow an employee with low vision to correctly enter and read information on the computer. There could be reorganization of the job. This could be where an employer provides a checklist to ensure task completion for an employee who who could have an intellectual disability. And reassignment. Reassignment is a another aspect of a reasonable accommodation, and this could be is you know reasonable accommodations in some situations where an employee can be reassigned to an open position in that same organization. Um, if determined that employee can better perform those essential functions of that position, the other position. So I just wanted to provide a few lists and start having us all think about different types of reasonable accommodations that are out there and that exist. And as you can start to see, there's many different ways that accommodations in the workplace can look like. Now, if I determine that I might need an accommodation or that one should be should be implemented, I, as an employee, can choose to disclose. And that is always the first important thing I like to share if the topic of disclosure is that you get to choose. It is your choice, right? There's no single right or wrong approach to disclosing, I would say. Disability disclosure, decision-making process couldn't start with just reflective questions like, hey, when is the right time? How much information does the employer need to know? Or how will disclosing the information affect my employment? After an employee discloses a disability to their manager or to human resources, those are two areas you can start the disclosure process. Typically, disclosure takes the form of, because of my disability, I am having trouble with X job duty or benefit or privilege of employment. And for an employee to disclose that they have a disability without also saying that it's impacting their work is usually not sufficient to begin the accommodation process. So you have to make the case that it is affecting some aspect of your work. And a very important part, of course, is that this disability disclosure should never be ignored. Um, I also like the phrase of the company is the company's expert and you are your expert. And what I mean by that is the company is going to know what they are looking for, what they want out of each respective employee in their job, the essential functions and their goals. And you are your expert in knowing what you need around you to help you perform those essential functions. Um, and so it's kind of like meeting in the middle, when and kind of negotiating together when it's coming to this process. So you disclose, right? Either with your manager, supervisor, if your relationship is good, uh, and you feel safe to talk with them and share, or you can start the process with the HR department of your organization. And then from there, you should start a documentation process. You want to get your agreed upon accommodation in writing. That's very important. Let's say in future, the accommodation that's agreed upon maybe doesn't get followed through with. You want that in writing so you can lean back on that, if that were to ever happen. We have a sample documentation link on this slide, and that is actually from the Department of Fair Employment and Housing in California. They have created a sample documentation. There's actually no one universal documentation that the federal government requires employers and employees to follow. This will look different for every unique individual employer and organization. Um, but some documentation and writing will be important to get that agreed upon accommodation um, in that form. Now, if the need of it for an accommodation is not obvious, the employer may be required to provide documentation of a the employee may be required to provide documentation of a disability from the appropriate health or rehabilitation professional. Now, with that said, in determining a disability, an employer may request medical records, but only directly related to the disability and need of accommodation, and they may not request a specific diagnosis. Okay, the last part is implementation. This is a really important part that, again, once the agreed upon reasonable accommodation is in writing, then start, to identify and make a plan to put it in effect with your supervisor and organization, including any necessary training for the employee. If an employer plans to deny an accommodation request, they should have a prepared reason for why they are denying the request and give that to the employee. Now, as the accommodation is in process, it is very important that this is an ongoing process. Take notes, write down, note take, process, and document how things are going, how this accommodation is going. So it's important to document when you are using said accommodation, the actions taken, and how these adjustments are helping with your continued success. The documentation of this process will help all parties involved. So it's important that, again, not only do we get it in writing, we agreed upon through a negotiated agreement, but also implement and document as the accommodation is provided. Lastly, here, before we introduce our guest panelist, I do want to just link to a few different organizations that I believe are amazing. Some are California specific, some are nationwide, that essentially protect your rights in the workplace, requesting these reasonable accommodations that we're talking about. Disability Rights California is a federally designated protection and advocacy system for the state of California. These kind of systems are services that make sure civil rights of people with disabilities in California are protected. To accomplish this, the staff of Disability Rights California provide technical assistance across the state for legal provisions of the ADA law. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing of California um, administers state laws that prohibit harassment and discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity is the entity that investigates any complaints of job discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, age, or genetic information, and they take action to stop discrimination. The California Department of Justice Office of the Attorney General's Civil Rights Section is committed to the enforcement of both federal and state civil rights laws in California. And the California Fair Employment and Housing Commission is responsible for enforcing state laws, and they make it illegal to discriminate against a job applicant or employee because of a protected characteristic. The last two here are resource networks. One is JAN, which stands for Job Accommodation Network. They are a free leading source of expert and confidential guidance on workplace accommodations and disability employment issues. I've been on that website myself. It's a really amazing resource. I can't highlight that one enough. And then the last one here on this list is the ADA Network, National Network. So the Americans with Disabilities Act National Network, and that resource provides up-to-date information, guidance, and training on this law. All right. And now, with all of that said, I would like to introduce our guest panelists today, and I am going to pass it over to them and let them introduce themselves. And then Eric and I have a few questions for Cynthia, and then we're going to open it up to questions for everyone on this call. So, Cynthia, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you, Eric, for having me on this call. It's greatly appreciated. My name is Cynthia Munoz. I am a vocational rehabilitation counselor in the Santa Barbara office here at the California Department of Rehab.
Awesome. Thank you, Cynthia. And as mentioned, Eric and I have just a few questions for you today. Um, and I'll go ahead and get started. We'll flip-flop asking the questions. So I'll start with the first one here. Um, Cynthia, when you were a college student, did you use accommodations? And if so, what was your experience like in terms of interacting with the disability office or academic departments, faculty, and staff?
Yes, as a college student, I did request accommodations, and the process was a very positive one, although in many ways unfamiliar to me because having been in the special education system in K through 12, it was quite different because I had a team of, like a um, department chair, school counselor, and a few others that pretty much took care of the accommodations that I was receiving in those different levels of schooling prior to college. So then when I got to college, I realized that everything fell on me to make sure that I obtained. So I had to make sure that I had my disability documentation and that I met with a DSPS counselor. And then from that point onward, also had conversations with certain instructors. So it was not a difficult process, but it was one where I knew I had to take a lot of initiative to make sure that certain um, services were received. And then also being a first generation um, low income college student, I also had to navigate the what we oftentimes call the hidden curriculum, things that are pretty natural to college going students. So, understanding what office hours were, understanding what a syllabus was. And so there was a lot of adjustments that I had to make, but the collaboration between DSPS and the faculty were always positive because they always were very supportive of services that I was requesting, and we just made sure that constant communication took place.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Next question is in regards to requesting accommodations, has your experience requesting them in the workplace been similar or different to academia?
Absolutely. I would say that uh, they have been different because DSPS at the college or at the university level, it's like this very specific department that understands, that is knowledgeable about various disabilities and accommodations. And so as a student, I feel like you oftentimes automatically feel supported by that specific department. And so in the employment realm, it can be a little tricky because there's certain chains of command, so to speak. You might have, of course, a supervisor, and then you have HR, and then your supervisor's supervisor. So it might not necessarily be all that clear oftentimes as to, who to go to or how to approach the actual accommodation. So, but of course, oftentimes you do want to start with your direct supervisor or with HR, whichever you feel, would be best. Of course, HR always handles the legality of making sure that these accommodations are put in place and that the correct laws are being handled correctly. So, but yes, they do differ. And I would say it also depends on the culture of the environment where you work. Some individuals or some entities are very uh, much about providing accommodations, and others might be a little bit resistant. But know that as a person with a disability, of course, you have rights. And if it is affecting your ability to do the job, as Jake mentioned in one of the slides, then it is important to self-disclose and make sure that you go through the process to obtain what you need so that you can have a level playing field and be able to perform just as quote unquote non-disabled individuals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. All right, our next question for you is what advice would you offer to prospective employees seeking accommodations if unsure or on where to begin the process? And second question with this is where in your organization should they start?
Um, yes, I would advise individuals to, you know, I will say that it is something that can be a bit, what's the word? Perhaps overwhelming or again the process might be ambiguous, but I would say, have confidence. Uh, know yourself well. Know that if you got hired for a specific job or you're a student at a specific university or college, you got accepted because you belong there. Same thing with the employment realm. Of course, there might be times where you might feel a little insecure because you're new to the job. You don't know who your allies are. You might not know a lot about the job itself, and that's okay. There is always a learning curve, but make sure that you know, are confident in who you are, what you bring to the table. Understand your disability well. If you don't understand it well, go to see a professional that can explain it. Do Google searches. Go on YouTube and check videos on how people have self-disclosed regarding their disability. I mean, now there's a plethora of resources that you can um, select from. I've been hearing more and more how people even utilize TikTok for their information source. So just, try to gather as much information as you can so that you can go in there confidently and say, I'm a very well diverse person with various skills. However, I struggle with X, Y, and Z due to this particular condition or however you want to phrase it. But be confident in who you are, be well informed, and execute a plan so that you can get the accommodations in place.
Okay, I think we're on question four.
Yes.
Could you provide an example of how providing an accommodation positively impacted your approach to your position?
I feel that anytime that I've requested an accommodation, it's provided me a sense of um, self-confidence, knowing that I've been proactive, whether it was in the school setting or in the employment realm. It's kind of in a way like giving myself a pat in the back, so to speak, telling myself, you got this. Because, as an individual with a disability, we oftentimes have to make modifications, be creative, adjust many situations. So we have to really, provide ourselves with that feedback. And so I would say, yes, it's just made me a stronger person, a person with more confidence, and realizing that sometimes even when we don't feel very secure about ourselves because of all the things we have to constantly overcome. Take that as a source of empowerment because you have to realize that due to everything that you have to overcome, you're dealing with a lot more than the quote unquote average person. So that is sometimes something that's not noticed. It's the unknown of uh, your accomplishments. And I was mentioning this in a previous conversation that we had that oftentimes we don't even celebrate the fact that we got through the day and getting through the day or arriving to work is an accomplishment in and of itself, because people don't know the hurdles that someone with a disability overcomes. As an example, I'm a wheelchair user, and so I have to circle the lots oftentimes, not to come to work necessarily, but whether it's because I'm going out to lunch or going to another establishment. And so finding parking can be quite irritating because I have a modified van, and so I require a disabled stall that has more space for my ramp van. And so when I get to the location that I need to go to, at times I can feel a little flustered due to the process itself, but uh, even if the person that I'm meeting with doesn't know what I've been through, like internally, I feel a sense of accomplishment because, it might be something that other people take for granted, but being able to circle the parking lot, find a parking stall, get out of my vehicle and into the establishment. I mean, that's huge, you know? And so
Yeah.
I oftentimes have to, giggle and laugh about it and have a smile on my face because if I didn't, of course, my life would be a lot harder. So I would say also just celebrate the small accomplishments that in the long run are the huge ones too.
I like that. Thank you for sharing that, Cynthia.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
a beautiful perspective. All right, our next question is, how does your company ensure an inclusive workspace in terms of disability access?
Yes, I believe the California Department of Rehab does a great job of, putting disability at the forefront and in a positive way. On our website, there's oftentimes, a link you can click on. That has more information on a particular disability because it's, um, whatever month it would be like cerebral palsy awareness or muscular dystrophy. And there's always a lot of workshops that we can attend. Of course, provided our busy schedules, we're not always able to attend as many workshops as we would like, but um, there's a lot of intersectionality too with what Department of Rehab celebrates. So, for example, it's not only the disability component, but the LGBTQIA plus, or being African American or Latinx, and so they do a very good job of I think having those topics of access and equity and diversity. Um, I would say also, being a wheelchair user and working here, I oftentimes smile when I come into the building because, there's an automatic door button, and so I'm able to press that button, and it just makes my life so much easier, truly, because as with other people, I'm carrying my lunch bag, my purse, and other things. And so I think regardless of whether or not I was a wheelchair user, it just makes it um, so much easier to get through the door. And that's really an example of universal design, that it not only makes it easy for the person who's dealing with physical difficulties, but also for anybody else. And so I'm able to come in through the door really easily, and th that's just something that makes a world of a difference, for sure.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And then what advice would you give your younger self in regards to requesting accommodations uh, at your undergrad and graduate level institutions?
I would say that the advice I would give myself, my younger self, is what I just mentioned earlier. Be confident because sometimes, we don't give ourselves enough credit for all that we have to overcome, and sometimes all the overcoming gets exhausting, and and it's hard to really know who your allies are all the time. And sometimes you feel like the only ally you have is yourself. So definitely just be confident, be informative, and that doesn't say that doesn't mean that you can't have bad moments or bad days. But I remember, a few people telling me throughout different conversations that they would tell students, you might have a, a horrible day, but it's not a horrible life. And so that just gives perspective, just make sure you use all your resources that you form, as I had previously mentioned in another conversation, your cheerleading squad or the people that are going to be in your corner, have allies that are going to be there to provide a sounding board because life can get a little challenging, but we can make it through because we've made it through in other circumstances that have been difficult. And even if there have been hardships along the way, we've been successful because we've managed to get through it, and we're now at a different level.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Cynthia. Well, now I just want to open it up to everyone here on this call. If there's any questions for Cynthia, Eric, or myself, and feel free to either unmute yourself or put any questions or comments in the chat. And happy to take some time here to address any questions that anyone may have.
I think there are some questions in the chat from what I've noticed.
You might have answered there were questions about the recording, but
Oh.
oh, yeah, I think those are the main things in the chat.
I just want to
What? Okay.
I just want to reemphasize that every step in the job process, you have and are protected to request an accommodation. So, something that I don't know if is as a parent, but I just want to really re reaffirm here is just in this space is, even in the application process, sometimes job application process might, you know, require a test. And If you believe um, a reasonable accommodation you can request is extra time or a different alternative format, you can request that. So you don't even have to be an employee of an organization to start requesting, which is amazing, right? And just wanted to reemphasize.
We do have a question. Where does the accommodation process start for things in between education and the workplace?
Yeah, so
Part
maybe,
of, go
oh,
ahead.
go, no, no, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, no, I would just say as our office, DSP, so so internships, if it's connected to a course, if the research, like the 596 course, uh, if it's connected to a course, DSP would oversee that accommodations process. Um, if the student is in an employment role as a TA in that sort of capacity, at least on UCSB's campus, the accommodations process would be through the human resources disability accommodations officer, and that person is ecote, and their email is ecote@ucsb.edu. So it's kind of like, what role are you in, right? Are you in a teaching role or are you in a student role? So if you're in a student role, it would be DSP or the higher education entity, um, DSO office at the university or college, and it would be generally speaking the HR office if it's in a employment capacity. Did you want to say more about that, Jake?
No, I'm just gonna echo what you said. Yeah, as Eric mentioned, just whichever environment you're in, yeah, facilitating and starting that process accordingly, as Eric just mentioned, if it's in the school realm, like as a research assistantship or student assistant or teaching assistant, um, and starting with the disability support services office at that institution. Um, yeah. Eric, do you want to take the question put in the chat? Just kind of a follow-up question to our conversation here.
Would it still be DSP or equivalent for research not tied to the class? Uh, yeah, DSP wouldn't. So if it's not connected to the course or coursework, if it's connected to a graduate program, possibly, like as one of the milestones of completing a PhD or master's degree, um, it could be connected to DSP. So I would need to know a little more to answer that question further.
You could start with the IRCA entity, the on this campus if it's at UCSB. Research assistantships will fall under the undergraduate research and creative activities department. Um, and Anita Stahl is the individual who runs IRCA on this campus. And they could kind of facilitate as HR in that sense, in my mind, since if in this respective case, it wouldn't be tied to a class, then I would say going to the entity where research falls under. And for here at UCSB, it's under IRCA, um, unless otherwise specified. But that would be my thought on that.
Also, if you're a graduate student researcher at GSR, that would also be HR.
Yeah. So for
So,
grad research,
so you would be in your employment capacity in that case.
staff on the campus. Yeah. Great questions. I really
Yeah.
appreciate these questions. Any other questions or comments, concerns, or thoughts?
Unless one pops up, Cynthia, I was wondering if you thought of any other accommodations examples that you have made your position. Um, I know for myself, I use dictation software because of my disability, among other. Um, I have, had all of us are eligible for ergonomic studies so that we're working in a physically healthy way. So those are a couple of things I've used to make my position, to make me more efficient in my position.
Yes, absolutely. So I currently use software named Dragon Naturally Speaking, um, where I dictate into a headset and then it types for me. I also have what would be similar to an auxiliary aid, where this person is a Department of Rehab employee, and this person takes notes for me during intakes. I do wanted to bring up that even though we do have a lot of software that is helpful, oftentimes it is in addition to that helpful to have a human assist because for example, if you record a Zoom session and you need the transcription at times, depending on what was said, it might not be typed correctly. And so, yes, those are two of the accommodations that I've used recently. In the past, as a student, just to kind of provide more clarification as to what services I requested. I had extended time on tests. I also had auxiliary aides take notes for me during classes. Um, or also, I had shared notes with the I forget the carbon paper. I forget
Oh
what
yeah, NCR paper. Yeah, that was
NCR
back in the
paper.
day. Yeah.
Yes, back in the day that it's not utilized anymore, of course. I also used this reading software by the name of Kurzweil 3000, where it highlights the text as it's being read by a voice, which is not so robotic as it used to be. They have different voices that you can utilize for the software to be read aloud. And that also allows you to take notes. I think it's very similar to a software by the name of Glean, Glean.
Yeah, or
Um,
CapD. CapD is another reading software. Yeah.
hmm And if anyone is able to attend, I think there is a national conference every year. It's put on by the Cal State University of Northridge, but it's held in Anaheim, and they have like the latest technology for, different learning styles and individuals who have low vision or complete visual impairment, complete blindness, as an example. But it's quite fascinating to be aware of what is out there. Also, in addition to that conference, there is an expo that happens every year during the month of February, I believe, in Los Angeles. It's called the Abilities Expo. That's more geared towards individuals that have mobility difficulties that are wheelchair users, but it's quite fascinating. I refer to it as like the Disneyland for people with disabilities because they show you how you can modify your home, like your kitchen. They have power wheelchairs and just a lot of different things, like even adaptive clothing for people that have difficulty getting dressed. So, yes, there's a lot out there. Sometimes, things are expensive because some things are covered by insurance, others might not be. But in terms of the employment aspect, a lot of accommodations are not very costly. So don't feel like you're a burden or you're requesting something that is not reasonable because oftentimes these accommodations are very reasonable and it's just a matter of again being informed, doing your research, advocating for yourself because sometimes you might be told no and that no should not be that response. It should be a yes. And oftentimes we are our best advocate, but we just need to be able to put the pieces together to the puzzle, so to speak, and make a strong case for why these accommodations, why these services are needed, because nobody knows your struggle other than you, and people sometimes might downplay what you might be dealing with because they might think, oh, you don't really need that. It seems like you have it under control. Well, of course, there's a lot that is not visible, you know, and so we have to make sure that things are clear. Um, it can be an intimidating process. I understand it. I don't mean to sugarcoat things and make it seem as though everything is nice and rosy and simple because it's not. But that's why I suggested, forming a group of people who are your allies, asking questions, have conversations with people who have disabilities or just people that you trust, even if that is your doctor or your significant other, whoever is in the realm of your support system, ask questions because definitely you're not alone in this process. A lot of people might not uh, feel comfortable discussing these topics because it is personal, but these conversations need to be had because it's the only way we learn more about ourselves and each other, really.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know if s- somebody in the room had unmuted themselves, so I didn't know if someone wanted to say something, but feel free to do that. Um,
If there's no other questions, the only last quick question I have, Cynthia, for you is, do you want to just give a little shout out to DOR and what DOR is all about and how students may sign up and take access of those resources?
Absolutely. So, DOR, the California Department of Rehab, oftentimes known as DOR for DOR, we are a government agency that serves people with disabilities. And by disabilities, I mean all disabilities. So, physical, cognitive, psychological, any disability that the person feels is an impediment to obtaining or maintaining employment. So we do an intake, and then after an intake, a plan for employment is developed. That is a document that has the services that the person is eligible to receive. Once the plan is approved by a manager and signed by the client, who we oftentimes refer to as a consumer, um, then that's when services can be carried out. Some of the services that people can obtain are services such as employment assistance, tuition assistance, books, supplies, um, also assistive technology. There's a lot of services. These plans are individually tailored, so just because one person gets one type of service doesn't mean that the next is getting the same service. So it is very much dependent on what goal, what occupation slash career path the person is selecting to pursue. But Also, what functional limitations, as Eric pointed out earlier, what are the functional limitations that people are dealing with, and how can DOR provide that assistance to remove that barrier? Um, so yes, these services are meant for everyone who feels they need assistance with obtaining or maintaining employment, and then also assistance with what we call training, which is essentially educationally related services. Our general number is 805-560-8130. I can be contacted. Also, my email is Cynthia, Cynthia .Munoz at dor.ca.gov. But essentially, the application can be found on the DOR website, which is dor.ca.gov. You click on the tab that reads I am interested in, and you click on employment services, and then that's how you start the process. And then after the application is submitted, then you are called to do an intake remotely via Zoom, by phone, or in person. And then after that meeting, we meaning DOR staff, are given about 90 days to create the plan for employment for the individuals who we've seen for intakes.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing about DOR,
That's so
Cynthia.
great. Yeah, as a user of DOR services, I had my employment plan written and got assistance to go back to school and employment preparation, interview skills, resume preparation when I became a marriage and family therapist. So they really helped me. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes, and I'm a former client also of DORs.
Yep.
Um, I became a DOR client. I think my junior year of high school, and it continued on, through my different times of being in education. So I do want to clarify that we support like the undergrad level as well as the graduate level, so masters and PhDs. So. Yes, we are here to assist you. Our office, by the way, is open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., with the exceptions, of course, of holidays. But if for any reason you're not able to access the application, you can also always come in person and fill one out, or an attached PDF file can be provided to you if that's easiest.
Fantastic.
So,
Awesome. Well, I will close it out for today's workshop. And just want to say thanks for everyone joining in and tuning in. And we appreciate your time. Thank you again, Cynthia. We appreciate
thank
your
you.
time and advice that you shared today.
Very
Thank you
much.
so much. Take good care.
Thank you.
Thanks.